This is a series that we have been continuing since we started the Zoom classes some 2 months ago, I think. And it is again on the theme of what we are going to be seeing the world reshape itself, in what form, because we are going through a very traumatic experience, as you all must have gathered, not just here, but the world over. And we need to really look upon it as not just a crisis, but maybe a crisis that could be used to our advantage. And this series is just opening up areas which I think are where the opportunities lie, knowing what the problems are. So what I will be doing in this class is to cover in this agenda, which I've got in my next slide here, is this: the situation that is facing us. It covers a lot of, issues here, like jobs, society, governments, capitalism, geopolitics, business, manufacturing, climate, globalization, China-US trade war. That's a lot. But I'm not going to be going into any great detail as such, but really will cover sufficiently for our purposes. And then, because we are sort of in this situation, there are opportunities for us in the high-tech area, which is why I want to highlight that. Because if you are going to come out of this pandemic in some sort of reasonable, healthy fashion, we need to address the issues and take advantage of the opportunities. Now, in the previous sort of lectures, we have covered, in the last lecture particularly anyway, how the countries have changed globally in terms of the big parameters that we consider to be part of their well-being, like their GDP, their use of renewable energy, and their manufacturing, their exports, and so on. You remember we covered that last week. So in a way, we need to be able to see where the new technologies can fit into the modern world. And that's what we're going to be covering here as to what these things are. What are the high-tech opportunities? And of course, we will also just consider very briefly what the impact is going to be on us, because that's an important thing. At the end of the day, we need to consider our well-being. So here we are. That's what we're going to be covering today. And let me continue with my first sort of thing. Okay, let me just move this thing a bit. Perhaps you can see the whole thing if I just put it down here. Okay, you can see the whole thing now. Now, we did cover in some lectures back what this fourth industrial revolution is. Just for those people who have joined us, the fourth industrial revolution is the one that we are currently living through, and the one that the three previous ones, I just want to remind you, refresh your mind. The first one was about steam power that gave rise to all sorts of industrialization. Second one was electricity, which furthered the production processes and increased the productivity. The third is really computers, which then brought in a massive increase in productivity again. So, and now we are into the fourth one, which has to do with the AI basically. And here is the definition that I would like to sort of show it to you as being the one that that was defined for us at Davos. You remember we did a lecture on Davos as to what they were talking about before the pandemic came about. And they were very real issues they were looking at. And one of the issues that they were looking at was how big a change this AI is going to make to society before this virus came and hit us. So these are the issues, and their definition was this. As the advent, the fourth industrial revolution can be described as the advent of these cyber-physical systems. which basically means, we are going to be somehow linked up with physically with our computers, in a bio sense as well. So involving entirely new capabilities for people and machines. So it's a pretty big sort of, if you like, concept, uh, bringing in man and machine together in that sense, in a very close fashion. While these capabilities are reliant on the technologies and infrastructure of the third industrial revolution, so it is, of course, based on computers. The fourth industrial represents entirely new ways in which technology becomes embedded within societies and even our human bodies. So it really, again, a man-machine interrelationship, but in a much more integrated and close sense. So examples of this that we can look at is the genome editing. You've heard of these. I will go into that a little bit more later as to what that is. Machine intelligence, of course, we'll also look at that to see what that is. Breakthrough in material, I'm not going to cover that this time. Approaches to governance, yeah, partially, just briefly. And the cryptographic methods such as the blockchain. Blockchain is the one that you've heard is the technology that the Bitcoin uses. And I'll just briefly mention that as we go along. So this is what this whole industrial revolution is going to be about. And in us new post-pandemic world, we need to keep that in mind, that this technology is there for us to make something of it and utilize it. And this morning's lecture, I sort of was not too happy that the issue that didn't get addressed was how the economy was going to be reshaped with the tools that they have, which is the monetary type of policies and the fiscal policies that you mentioned. So I think the reshaping has got to go beyond just these two to look at it in terms of seeing what sort of society are we going to create? Are we creating the same type of society that we had to the pre-pandemic world? Or are we going to create something new and use this crisis in some meaningful way to change the world? So that's why I was a little bit, I had a question, but I was too far back in the queue, so my question didn't get put up. Otherwise, I was going to put that question up and say how the reshaping of the economy is going to happen in his sort of approach that he was talking about. Okay, the questions that we have about the fourth industrial revolution is, what is the primary goal? The primary goal is not just to go back to bad old ways. It is really to improve the state of the world. Important sort of thing to keep in mind, because quite often we get lost in too many figures and we don't see the wood for the trees, as it were. So really, at the end of the day, it's not just our own well-being, but the well-being of the whole world, other people as well. So it's a very, very important sort of objective to keep in mind for the policy makers that are going to be sort of making decisions of this. Okay, another question. How do we avoid a world of joblessness, low productivity, and inequality? Now, this is the immediate problem, of course. We have, of course, the idea of the objective, the aspirations of bettering the world, but the immediate pressures are of joblessness, the low productivity because businesses are going out of business, and the disparity that we already see exists, and that is going to become worse. So this is another question that must be an upper mode in our mind if you're going to be addressing solutions for the future, for our future. Okay, another question, almost anyone will be, so we have a potential, you see, the ability to invent new products and services cheaply and quickly through this fourth industrial revolution, because you've got the tools. It's just a matter of being able to recognize these tools and be able to weave them into the policies that the governments and all the decision makers make. And we see time and again the decisions that are taken are very short term. It's a bit like the corporate world that we have seen. They're worried about the quarterly bottom line, and very little long-term thinking is there. So we have to keep that in mind, that we have a very a system that prevents us from really surging ahead. Although I've heard the Johnson talk about how we are going to surge ahead on all fronts once we come out of Europe. Uh, I mean, it makes me wonder in what sense is he talking that we're going to be surging ahead. So he'll have to explain that a bit more clearly. Okay, another question, the interplay between fields like, you see, this is the big sort of area of high tech that needs to be grappled with by policymakers. But yet I don't see much reference to any of these things at all, which is why I feel a little bit disappointed when we talk about, you know, things like, okay, just getting out of the current crisis we've got, without talking too much about how we are going to reshape the economy as you come out. Uh, that sort of thinking is not there, not to the extent that I would like to see in the decision makers and those people who come and talk to us. Okay, now where are we? The situation that is facing us is this. Before the pandemic, we had job losses already. So let's not forget that pandemic is not the only thing that caused job losses. It is, of course, quite severely affecting our jobs, but the joblessness had already been part of our lives, because what had happened was that the the sort of companies had gone in for automation to such an extent that they sort of caused a lot of job losses. Uh, Most of the job losses I keep repeating in my classes is due not to other factors but to automation. And yet we don't hear too much about that. And of course, we had globalization, which was a good thing. It brought the whole sort of world more prosperity, because the poorer countries became the suppliers of a lot of supply materials and items. And of course, technology was there at that time as well. Now, what we are facing now is a much more severe impact on jobs, and that is to do with the factories shutting down all over the world, and workers told to stay at home because of the virus. And we are getting handouts, as you know, as rescue being given to companies as well. So we'll have to sort of see how we come out of this scenario in a way which doesn't let us stumble back into the bad old ways. So what's the impact on society? Because we just cannot look at one aspect of it, not just jobs. There's going to be social sort of considerations and politics as well. So what we had in the previous pandemic world, prior to the pandemic, is we had, you know, liberal democracies like our country and so on, free markets, freedom of expression, and we also had the computerization, big data, and all that that was happening. Now we are having to look at the future, which is going to be these two areas I keep repeating are the big areas of our society of the future: infotech and biotech. Biotech is how we are going to integrate biologically with machines, that the machine becomes part of us. And the infotech is all this big data, how that's going to be used by AI and so on. And then, of course, there's the other impact on society. What's going to be happening to our identity? Now, because of joblessness, there's going to be, I think, a lot of concerns regarding who to blame, um, and then considerations as to who we are. So those sort of issues also are there very much, and some of these are going to lead to these types of ideas, which are going to be, you know, putting walls around our our sort of domains, and nationalism is going to be, you know, calling the shots in many ways, because they 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 have the fear factor on their side, because the unknown is always fearful. Change is always a bit difficult. So nationalism says, we can give you, the best of life, provided you sort of put moats around the wall and pull up the drawbridge and all that type of thinking, like America first type of thing. And of course, we are heading towards this more government. We saw that the government stepped in to bring in all the rescue packages for the businesses, and also gave us money sitting at home, part of the salaries and so on. So for that, in exchange, is going to get, uh, and the health it's giving us, of course. Uh, in exchange, it wants a lot of data from us, and that data is going to, multiply enormously, and it will be in the hands of the government. That's going to be the impact on our society. So, what are the governments going to be doing with that? So, in the post-war, the institutions worked. We had the international cooperation, World War II, that type of international cooperation after Second World War. These institutions were set up, uh, the Bretton Woods type of ideas, and moved towards multilateral approach. And that message was good, and it worked. It didn't work 100%, but it did work after a fashion. Now what we have is a future that we're going to be looking at, that is like the phrase America first. What does it mean? It means unilateralism. It means I go my way, forget about everybody else. Identity politics. These demigods are going to come up and sway your opinions. Um, and then, of course, powerful nations will want to not give away the status that they have, but will, in fact, in my opinion, they're going to sort of use their leverage more to their advantage, which would not help, I think, globally. And of course, there's always a grab for more power, so that's going to be happening by the governments. So these are the large sort of ideas that I would like you to keep in mind as to which way should be going and how. Now, what's happening to capitalism? I think, you know, remember I think in my sort of one of earlier lectures, I did talk about all these things. So I'm going to be just skimming through that. You see, the previous ideas of free market and all that, individualism was, touted as really a good sort of thing, and Margaret Thatcher was the lead lady on that. Free markets, of course, relatively free. Globalization, that was a good idea, because the corporate world saw that they could make a big bucks out of it very quickly because of low sort of wages elsewhere. But their main concern was to increase demand and consumption. So that was the whole sort of thing previous to pandemic. Now what we are facing is a much more emphasis on the nation and society as a whole. The government stepping in a big way means that they are not just helping individual companies to come up, but they are sort of in a wholesale way helping the nation. And we have seen that with the chancellor giving out, billions of dollars or pounds worth of rescue packages. Um, and that's all because of the virus. In fact, they're not doing it out of just altruistic reason. They know that the business, if they're founder, it's going to be very difficult to get them back. So it's a safeguard. It's better to spend money now a little bit than to spend a lot more later. Then another idea, I think, is that the realization that the workforce has got to be invested in. Now, I see, when I hear in the news that universities are going to go really very bad because, students are not going to be paying the 9,000 fees, all that, I mean, paying fees in the first place is a very wrong idea, I think. We must invest in people of the country. And of course, we need to have the green economy, which is what I think we are also aspiring towards. Okay, how is this affecting our geopolitics? Yeah, before we had this single superpower, USA, and that power was based on arms and the basis of 800 around the world, with arms being a very big business that kept the workforces alive, and the big money in sort of smiling to the bank. And of course, using that power to control the resources all over the world and the governments. So that was the situation that we saw with a unipolar world and the very rich having, tremendous power compared to some of the poorer countries of the world. Now, what we're going to be going towards is this multipolar world, because I think we have seen already signs of the US declining, and we are going to be finding a much more multipolar world, starting with the rise of China. So China is going to, and we saw in these slides in my last lecture how China has risen in the last 20, 30 years to such an extent that it's now, challenging the biggest power like the USA, not only just in terms of exports and all the other things, but in terms of having the technology and the graduates coming out, the manpower, the skills that they're developing, the investment they're making. So it's a huge sort of thing that is going to bring about a change in the world. But what we are also seeing, what has here? Yeah. Okay. We're also seeing that because this superpower thing, the partnership alliances also started to fray, and I think that's going to continue for a while longer. I think as people become much more inward-looking. Impact on businesses, global supply chains, all these systems that control corporations. Um, Consumption, again, was started to be the mantra that we always went, increase consumption. That has been the thing that everybody was chasing as the corporate world. That is the growth, in fact. Now we need to rethink, and the rethink is going to be not global supply chains, but maybe regional ones. Maybe we might have to go for more expensive goods because the low-cost labor is not going to be there. And maybe we should also look for low consumption. So let's see whether these sort of objectives are going to be met in any way. Manufacturing, has been the backbone in the past for a lot of big rich countries. But that has been decimated by automation, decimated in the sense of decimation of jobs, if you like. But as far as the profitability went, that sort of was there. It's just shifted from one place to another. There's a globalization, and of course we went in for the easy option, which is to control the finances, and the city is very good at that. Okay, what are we seeing now in the impact of the manufacturing? We will find that because the costs are now going to be relatively advantageous to go for renewables, that's a very good sign. That's the greening of the economy that we can look forward to. Transport and fossil fuels on their way out, the fossil fuels, oil, that's a good thing. And we talked about this Tesla, you remember, how they're coming in a big way, and this this internal combustion engine. That's all the motor cars that we have on the road today. They're all on their way out, and those companies like GM and Ford and even the German companies, they are on their knees at the moment. They can't, the total valuation of all these car companies, would you believe, is uh, is a little bit less than just one Tesla car valuation. GM, I think, is valued at 5 billion or something like that. And Tesla is 160 billion. So you can see the car companies in the current sort of atmosphere are going to sort of have a big job to try and survive. So that's why these type of ideas, electric cars, are going to come in a big way. Climate, yeah. So this is again the situation. We had some Paris Agreement, uh, also some agreement. Richer nations will help poorer nations. That's one of the reasons why Trump walked out. He said, "No, I don't want to pay for the poor nations polluting the earth. Uh, I can do without that, you know." So that's one of the reasons he pulled out. So there, we are in trouble as far as that these agreements are concerned because America is out. And we have, of course, to press on with this renewables. Remember, I told you about this Bank of England Governor Mark Carney. He said the corporate world has to buy into this idea, and they will buy into this idea only if they do the risk assessment as to how sustainable their businesses are going to be in the future. And if they find that it's not sustainable, then they will switch over to renewables and do some, you know, long-term planning. So that would be good. Now, rogue nations like USA, they're not cooperating. Although fortunately, the states, some of the states, are disregarding the federal sort of apathy on that, like California, for instance. Well, globalization, I think we said it's going to also change in its sort of way that it has been operating. It came about mainly because of interlinked, the internet linking production from and consumer markets and supply sort of items from various parts of the world. So low cost countries, you know, did better. They came out offering all sorts of advantages to the corporate world. So it became a commonplace to offshore jobs. But then it was at the cost of big job losses in the rich countries. And that led to what? Nationalism, because it led to the fact that they wanted to bring back the jobs because they said the jobs were taken by the other countries. Um, and then, of course, the local demigods of nationalism, they sort of blame, you know, always the other. And then, of course, limited immigration has to be imposed. And then the flow of, you know, Europe is based on free flow of manpower, goods, services, and finance. These are the four, if you like, mantras that Europe follows. And if you don't abide by this free flow of these four services, these four sort of things, then you can't be part of EU. And we are, in fact, opting out of that because we think we can do better somehow. And I think that's probably a false promise by the government. Inward-looking policies. This is what we are headed towards. Brexit. As Brexit is very much in the horizon still, and I think the chances of a no deal, I think, are very high. US first, again, very closed shop type of thinking. And of course, you know, war might be the way that the current status quo will go towards in trying to maintain the status quo. And this is one of the big wars that is going on, the China-US rivalry. Now, the US has seen that over a period of time, its productivity went down, with the result that the imports were higher than their exports, to the point where I think China was coming with a surplus of about 500 billion compared to USA. And USA, justly in a way, says, look, oh, this can't be, you know, sustained. We want to be able to have better terms with China. Now, China's lead came about because they were able to introduce all sorts of efficient ways of production, in addition to having low-cost manpower at their disposal, and an organized society which sort of follows sort of authoritarian type of discipline, which is a lot easier than what one can be engaged in democracies. So you have you know, large deficit there, which I talked about. The corporate world became fat and inefficient because they offloaded a lot of the work to the more efficient, poorer countries. Uh, and of course, the bottom line, they were seeking always to make money. So they made money because, they still had large margins. But then they had very little concern about social responsibilities. This is the big sort of failing of the post World War II order, this lack of social responsibility. If you look at the USA, if you, the medical coverage that they have is a disgrace. Whereas we are very sort of fortunate to have our NHS. So we need to be able to, not just go for growth and, and consumption, but we need to instill in governments a social type of sense. So what we have now, our tariff wars are underway. So with the Brexit for us, and with the pandemic, and with the trade war going on between USA and China, with the growth of the whole world going down, the economy is going down. On top of this trade wars, I think the prospects are pretty bad. So strategic power. So strategic power is less important because no point in having 800 bases like USA has all over the world with humongous number of missiles and nuclear bombs. No, nobody's going to be able to use that. So it's a waste of money, and it's becoming unimportant as well. Because what is becoming important is the economic might of the countries. And the countries are getting smart now. They have younger populations, and they will be able to call the shots, for their own well-being, quite in the short and in the long term soon. And then China thinks long term. This is one of the big advantages of having a type of government that China has, which they think long term because the government lasts 10 years. And in this President Xi Jinping, I think is going to be there for a lifetime. And since he is a visionary of a sort, I think he's going to do well. And this BRI, which I've talked about, the Belt and Road Initiative, is one grand narrative, which I think is a very, very important thing for the world to look at. Okay, so here we are. How are we doing for time? Okay, we still got about 20 minutes. Let's look at what is genetic engineering, because these are the technologies of the future. So if you're going to be coming out of the pandemic, we are going to have to focus on engineering of these type of areas. This has been there beforehand as well, but what we need to do now is to give it a much more accelerated type of position, put more money behind it, get more people educated, bring in more people, who can contribute towards it. These are the type of policies we need to engage in to be able to sort of have a country like UK, small country, 60 million people, with hardly any natural resources except the people. The people are its natural resources, and it needs to invest in that. And it's got the wrong sort of end of the stick in that, because it's not investing in people, because it charges them 10,000, nearly 10,000 pounds a year for educating them at university per year. When I went to university here, I was very lucky. The government paid for my tuition, and they paid me 350 pounds a year to sort of maintain myself, which went to my landlady. So I was very grateful at that time. But then, of course, some wise guys started to say, no, 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 we need to have these people pay for the education. And that was a very, very wrong decision. And we are paying for that because we have fallen back on technology. Europe, if you look at Europe education, they hardly pay anything for their education. And even if they pay, it's very, very little. But we are paying enormously, and we go into debt. So I think it's a very wrong decision that whoever made. So we are not investing in people. So that's a very bad start to try and engage in these types of areas. This is genetic engineering. You see, this is the DNA. It's got these strands which determine our characteristics and about life. So you can splice it off and put new things in there to correct the change. So the gene splicing, they call it. These are the type of technologies we want to bring in and be part of. there's something called nanotechnology. This is again technology which is of a very, very small little thing. They're 100 nanometers. If you look at the scale of what is meant by nano, it's a 1 billionth. So here is a sheet of paper is about 100,000 nanometers. So you can see it's pretty small. A strand of a human DNA is 2.5 nanometers. So I saw that previous picture of where I saw that helix. Uh, that sort of scale is 2.5 nanometers. So we're talking about very, very small little, dimensions. And the type of drugs that need to be developed are also going to interact uh, at that level to target the places like cancer cells that need to be done. So here is another picture of that, I think. Yeah. This is a picture where you've got the brain and there's the blood sort of thing being delivered, and there's a membrane there. And if you've got these type of little nanotechnology particles, it can go through the membrane and into the brain. So that's one of the dangers that one has to be careful about. But nevertheless, one can deliver these nanoparticles to the areas that need to be targeted for illnesses of one sort or another. So it's the scale of this nanotechnology that I want to highlight at this time. Okay, we know a lot about these robots. They do these tasks with a high degree of autonomy. And then, so it's a part of artificial intelligence. I will see a bit more of it later. This is a little picture, which is a rather little motorized one, a simple one. We are miles ahead of this type of technology today. Now, you might have heard of something called 3D printing. This is a way that you can create um, items or widgets or whatever you've got by giving instructions to a type of machine that will follow those instructions and create that item or widget for you using the material, it be it plastic or be it wood, be it whatever, steel, whatever it is. So it's a very powerful way of creating um, items that of machinery. Even little handguns can be made. I think somebody sent off the instructions for that, and some guy in the back room said you can make your own gun, from this instruction, and somebody did. So you've got they use plastics, yeah, for making it, and like metals and ceramics as well. So they can use any of the material with the instruction. They can create the item. It's a very powerful technology. Here it is. It's doing this plastic. It's injecting this plastic layer by layer according to the program, and it builds up this, rather complicated shape. See how complicated this is with all the ups and downs here. And yet it follows that, by layer by layer. So it's a very powerful technology. AI, our old sort of chestnut, as it were. It's going to be immensely relevant for us in the reshaping of the economy. And that's why I feel that if we are aware that these are the things that we need to target as we come out of the pandemic, we will be that much stronger. Rather than emerging weak, I think we can emerge stronger if we are going to be upscaling our skills and also awareness as to what it is that we need to do. So AI is the ability of programs, a machine to think and learn. Now, big thing about robotics and AI, robots are usually regarded as just following instruction given by a program, which a human being writes. But AI has something a bit more advanced, and that's why we hear a lot about it. And that is, it's got this capability of learning. It doesn't have to be taught, word by word by a human being. It learns. You might remember, I think some time back, I think I might talk about this later. Okay, that's just a picture of us becoming biotech, having a lot of technology in us. It's interesting to picture. Yeah, this we talked about the Internet of Things. You remember this discussion of 5G meeting is taking place, I think, in Downing Street just today or even soon, where they're going to talk about Huawei, who is the leader in the world of 5G. And 5G is very instrumental in connecting Internet of Things because the 5G has enormous speeds, 1 billion bits per second type of rate of transfer, which is humongous. Because what we have now is 1 kilobits, 1 megabit. When talking about a billion, that's humongously big. And if you're going to be having this transfer of data between things, be it driverless cars, be it automated tools, be it all the equipment in our homes and whatever, it's going to require lots and lots of communication capability. And I just hope that the meeting that they're going to come up with, because they're under severe pressure from USA. USA doesn't want Huawei to come in. Huawei is, years ahead of other companies. And if Britain is smart enough, if they're able to keep Huawei technology to come in and build the infrastructure, then a lot of scope will be given to people creating goods, good new products, and will be ahead of the game. And that's what we need. That's where we need to go. But if we crumble to the US pressure, then I think we are going to lose out in a bad way. I think this narrative that USA is putting out about data being stolen by China, it's wrong. It's false. It's just a political statement to try and keep Huawei out of the market, so that the US companies can catch up. Yeah, that's just the Internet of Things. Every item communicating with each other. That's why you need these big network speeds to be brought in. So we have to decide. So as a society, so as all results are ultimately driven by individual and collective choices. So we have to make the choices. Because I don't have much confidence in the government making the right choices. They want to stay in government and they're in power and they want to be able to maintain the status quo and sort of collect all the donations from the rich guys that they give them money to. And it's not just the choices so it's not just the people who invent things, like the designers, researchers, but it's our choices. See, this is what we have to put. We have to put the right people in government. And of course, investors are also very much part and parcel of this society. And we need to become aware, they need to become aware as well, how to adopt and employ these technologies in our daily life. Okay, this is a bit more about well, this is a bit more detail about AI. I might cover it in some other future lectures, but I want to give you time for some questions. So I'm just going to just scan through very quickly. This is what we'll do next time with more, this. So I will stop there and stop sharing of the screen so I can see you all. There you are. And we can go for unmuting all. Yeah, you unmuted. Yeah, some of you need to unmute it yourself, I think. Like Doug and Nina and Pam and Ross, you have to undo it yourself. Oh, you can't. Okay, I'll do it for you. Yeah.
Done.
Okay. Unmute.
Pamela, I don't know if Pamela can either. She's got the same problem, I think.
Okay, I'm trying to.
I unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah. Got it then.
If you have a question, put your hand up and I will just ask you to pose your question. Crystal clear. All right, go ahead. Doug?
Sorry, who's going?
Yeah, you go ahead, Doug.
Oh, okay. Right, I should think. Sorry, I saw that we had her hand up as well. Thanks for that. That was a really comprehensive coverage of everything. I mean, what is interesting is, because there are so many facets. There's political, there's economic, there's social, so many things coming together. It's a, use the, old analogy, it's a huge elephant that needs to be addressed. And the problem is, where do you start addressing something as big as complex as this? I'm with you, Shafiq. I have very little faith in our government to do that. I think it's got a very narrow,
Remit.
mindset. I think the mindset of the government is basically fundamentally at odds with what we try to achieve. I think they're also very out of touch. I don't think they've got the expertise. Bizarrely, I think the only source of knowledge and expertise in this probably resides with Dominic Cummings. He's probably the only person in government who has even got a remote grasp on this. But unfortunately, his interest is purely to serve, a very narrow stakeholder group and not society as a whole. So I guess, without sounding despairing, my question really is, how do we engage society? How do we engage people to shape that future? I think everyone has come out from the pandemic, or a lot of people, and said, look, clean air is beneficial, all sorts of things, local distribution networks. We've seen a lot of benefits, a lot of huge disbenefits from the lockdown. But how can we find a way of engaging people in this discussion and to put pressure on the government? Because I think if we just leave it to the government, we are going to be sadly left far, far, far behind in the evolution of this new world. And I think that's a terrible shame, because I think we'll all pay the price for that. Yeah. But I genuinely don't know how to take this forward. And that is what really worries me.
Yeah, one of the things that is a big failing at the moment is lack of leadership. Yeah. And we saw in the last crisis of the financial crisis, we had Gordon Brown and Obama take the lead, and they brought the whole world into some sort of agreement to follow a particular type of approach to solving the financial crisis of that day. And I think we came out of it because of leadership. Now, because we don't have, what I was saying, that because of leadership sort of vacuum, we have global issues on so many fronts that we talked about, and nobody's talking about a global leadership. I think there was some mention by a couple of, Gordon Brown, I think, and another person who talked about how we need to go towards a global leadership group that is going to sort of look at, in a very holistic sense, what needs to be done and provide solutions for the whole world, not just for individual countries. Because the tendency right now is that for each country to sort of say, well, we're going to look after our own people, we're not worried about the rest of the world. But as one very senior UCL professor said, if we are not able to maintain our own house, if we're not able to have you can't have a good house, he says, if you don't have a good neighborhood. So in a way, you need to address the problems of the world along with your own problems. Now, that's a hard sell, I think, for any government, but I think we have to move towards that. So I would say that the only way that your concerns, which are very real, and I seek to sort of also accept that without leadership, it's very difficult. We are going to be fragmented, and that is a disaster, I think, for the whole world to come out of it in some sort of reasonable fashion. Okay, more on that, I think we can talk about as well. Let's see if anybody else has a question. Pamela, you're, I think some of you are still without your...
They can't get, they're still muted. A lot of people are still muted.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. I think from my side, everybody's unmuted except Doug, I think. and Ross.
Ah, that's got right. It's worked now.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, it's got
George
that.
is,
Oh, yes.
George is still not unmuted.
God.
And neither's Diana. Diana's still muted. And Nimi.
Yeah.
Maybe.
She's
Nimi.
unmuted. Yeah, she's
No,
not.
she's muted. And
She's muted.
Giselle.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Oh, anybody else who wants to say anything?
Yeah,
Comment?
Nimi was waving her hand.
Oh, yeah.
And George. And George.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they can't get in.
Well, at the moment, it doesn't say muted in my area here.
Unmute all again.
Unmute everybody and mute them again.
No, unmute them. Just leave them unmuted.
Yeah, I don't see anybody muted in my sort of.
Really? Okay.
There's Diana, George, Giselle, Nimi, all still muted.
Back, yeah.
And George.
Okay, I'm going to mute and unmute again. Let's see. Allow participants to unmute themselves. Yeah, let me do that if they have a problem. Okay, now.
Okay, I can unmute myself now.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. George, you can
No,
try.
that still works. Well done.
Better.
Well done, Shafiq.
That's better.
Okay, let's then continue. What was the question?
George is still not mute.
Just,
George is still.
Giselle's still.
Yeah,
Ah,
okay.
Yeah, no, my question is how to unmute.
Yeah. No, okay, George, I couldn't hear your question. Do you have a question?
No, it was how to unmute. Where is this intelligence going?
Okay. Anybody else?
Giselle still, for some reason, doesn't seem to be able to unmute.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know why.
Well, in my case, yeah. It seemed to be. Nimi, you are also not able to talk?
I am. No, I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about this 5G?
Yes, it's-
Okay, very good. We can hear you, Giselle. Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask you about this? Can I ask you about this 5G that's going on everywhere?
Yeah.
Now, the whole of London has been dug up. Now, apparently, people are having very weird dreams since the crisis has started. You know, you read about this in the papers sometimes. The Guardian had a piece on it, and also the Times. Now, do you think that there is any connection with all this stuff that's going down in the streets? You know, because it must have an effect on the energy level somewhere. Now, do you think that it's possibly affecting the way that people are dreaming? So it's already affected their consciousness somehow.
Well, I can't give a very definitive answer on that, but there was, just to go by some parallels, you remember when they put the pylons up with high tension wires, you know, carrying about 600,000 volts and so on to transfer electricity from one substation to another. There was a stock that if you are very near that, your brain waves and your bodily functions are going to be affected. But it turned out that it's not really. One of the reasons I think is again because not enough data has been given to us. We are in the sort of unknown land. But my own feeling is that this 5G again is much more a political question than a technical or even biological question. It's much more, I think, to our disadvantage if we don't go for 5G soon enough. And I think this high frequency, it is well shielded actually, if you look at it. Whereas we have our wireless at home, some people do take some precautions and switch off their wireless at night. So one could be 100% more sort of secure in one's protection by not exposing oneself too much It is short. It is short frequency, but it's not the frequency of X-rays or anything like that.
I can just come in there.
Isn't it magnetic?
I suspect it's more to do with the psychological effects of the lockdown on people that have actually had an effect on people's dream patterns and the way the brain operates rather than a technological impact.
But I do know there's something to do with the magnetic thing, you know, from 5G that is actually having an effect on our bodies. But I think 4G did and 3G did, but this 5G just seems to be stronger. But it does have an effect, but it's a magnetic. It's something to do with magnetic.
Yeah, well, 5G is very high speed. It's about 100 times the speed of 4G, which means the frequency is very high.
Yeah.
But because it is very high, it is only short. It can carry only short distances. You remember the old radio waves? If you had
Yes.
a long wave, it would carry a bit further. A short wave, you had to bounce it all over the world. Also, so the frequency or the wavelength of the 5G is very, very small, but not as small as to be that of X-rays and things like that. So it won't be penetrating to that extent. Yeah. Right. Giselle, you were trying to say something, were you?
Well, no, I'm wondering even more so than last year when I think I mentioned that if the government want to shape things more, rather than bringing in immigrants to fill jobs, why don't the government give out more incentives, for example, for people to enter nursing, to enter medical fields in the NHS, all sorts of other jobs we have going here, and we're saying that we don't have enough. And social work is another field where there's a huge shortage of people. And in social work, they're going abroad every year to trying to recruit people from Australia, New Zealand, and Canada because we have a shortage. And I don't know why the government are not doing more, giving more incentives to the British people to enter these fields. So it is one way to do it, and I don't know why they haven't done more.
I think a lot of countries depend on, if you like, a workforce which can be doing certain types of work, but not all types of work. If you look at our education policy itself, you remember it's only a percentage of students who go to university. The rest go to all sorts of other what we need.
I can't hear you very well. There's interference.
Yeah.
Someone's talking on. Someone's talking over us.
Shall I mute
Someone
you all
on the
again?
phone.
I'll mute you
Someone's...
all. You unmute yourself when if you want to. Okay, I'll let you unmute yourself. This way we can stop the general sound, creeping in. Manpower, you see, one of the principles that Europe has grown is because of free flow of manpower, services, goods, and something else. So those sort of freedoms are essential for a very vibrant economy. You cannot have all your goods being produced in one country that you need. It's a very interconnected world now. You need the skills as well from various parts of the world to come in and go, because it's not just a question of having indigenous skills that for every aspect of your economy. So this is why immigration is such a big issue here. They cannot come up with figures which they can promise to keep to, because the demands of the economy are such that they have to sort of bring in people who can give the necessary expertise that is required. You know? So I mean, every country tries to do that, to try and attract people who can make a big contribution. Some do it by saying, like America, they say, if you bring in $2 million, we'll give you the passport. And over here, if you bring in £500,000, you can get a British passport. You know, those sort of schemes are there. But if you,
Shafiq,
yeah, sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say I have a little problem with that attitude, with the ease, four principles, and what you're saying about the states, because that seems to prioritize economic above everything else. Now, to me, it seems that social cohesion is a really important part of society functioning well. And if you permit lots of people with very different cultures to come in, then it rattles a society, which is what we've had with Brexit, I think, that people suddenly don't know what to do with it. And I think there has to be a balance between economic growth and social cohesion, whereas we just don't seem to think about that aspect of it at all. It's all money concerned. But what about the social ramifications of what happens when you introduce lots of alien cultures into a society without giving people time to get accustomed to it gradually? I think that for me is a problem.
Yeah, I accept that, you know, the identity problem of what we mean by English or what we mean by French or whatever, is not an easy question to answer. But I accept the fact that, you know, it's not easy to get lots and lots of people come in a short period of time. There, what we need to do is to be able to attract people who can make a contribution and have some sort of control over how they can be, you know, integrated into the community. If our sort of policies are such, and I've seen that happen in Europe, for instance, although we were part of Europe, they never gave the benefits of Europe to the British public. It was rather a question of basically, you know, having a negative views of Europe, if I can remember. So their job of selling the benefits of immigration and having a sensible policy, I think, is lacking in governments. And they, I don't think, have done a very good job in the past. If you look at the Windrush thing at all, I mean, it's such an absurd sort of situation. People who've been here for 20, 30, 40 years, they're sent back to West Indies. I mean, it's all a result of Theresa May's hostile environment, she calls it, and subsequently, you know, at least Sajid Javid, when he was Home Secretary, says, no, I don't want to have that hostile environment. But then Priti Patel coming in, I think she's a bad news person for the economy and for the Home Office, in my opinion. So we have to be able to do a better job of integrating in terms of how you sort of educate the local indigenous people, how you then spread the education in such a way that there's no ghettos and what have you. It's a matter of managing it properly. If you look at some of the, even Germany, although Germany has gone to the right recently, that is because 1 million people were taken in from Syria, you remember. That was on humanitarian grounds. But they have done a much better job of trying to, you know, bring about the management of these people coming in. So it's a question of how the media sort of plays it, how the government sort of works the policies, and then, you know, a sensible sort of solution. I'm not saying sort of controlled immigration take place, but a controlled immigration with the right sort of policies to integrate. Yeah, Doug.
Can I make just both? Because I think the other factor is investment in local communities, and you know, over the last 10 years, the government has basically, you know, stripped back financial assistance and support to local communities. And I think that is a big factor. If you're going to have people coming in, you've got to invest in the infrastructure to be able to support them. And, you know, there's lots of reasons people gave about why problems with immigration, but, you know, things like about being able to access doctor surgery, school places and things like that were being cited. And if people are feeling neglected and left behind by their own government, and they have been suffering terribly under austerity, it's very natural that, you know, that they will try to demonize and find someone else to blame. And I think there's lack of investment and lack of belief in the importance of local authorities is actually a very significant factor. And can I just say one other thing, just because you mentioned Windrush, if people don't know, 8:30 on BBC tonight, there's a program called, I think it's called Waiting in Limbo, which is basically the story of one of the people who was caught up in the Windrush scandal. It's written by his brother. And it's on BBC television tonight.
Okay, thanks. Be on the lookout for that to have a look. Yeah.
Just one point, Doug. I agree with a lot of what you say, but my issue is that you can't, if you suddenly have a huge number of people. So we had from Europe 3 million people. We had in the past, you know, in the 50s or whatever, even with the Caribbeans, thousands of them. Suddenly, so many people come. And I don't think society knows what to make of it. Government hasn't had time to do anything about it, and we're all left in the situation we are, which is of some of hostility, people who felt the direct effects of immigration, which haven't been positive for them, people who think they can't go to their doctor or get into their schools. So I think it's the speed at which immigration takes place that causes the problem.
I agree with you. It's not just that. I agree that it's a multifaceted issue which needs, but it needs, as you say, a well thought out, wise policy. And I'm not entirely sure that wisdom is a word that I would use to describe this government.
No, and I think I take that one step further and say, going back however many years, even to Windrush, the politicians have never stopped to think about the social outcomes of immigration, and then suddenly you see what's happening now everywhere, which is, suddenly there are a lot of people who feel they don't belong. We should never have got into this situation.
No, I agree.
I believe that there's always been resistance to immigration, unfortunately, in all countries. And I remember when I was young, Paki bashing and terrible things going on in Luton and all sorts of things. And there was you know, in America, when the immigrants started going in there was a lot of resistance to people taking their jobs and what have you. And I think this is an ongoing problem, but we have to have open arms for refugees. My family were refugees initially, but I know that there is terrible resistance, and I'm sort of the other way. I sort of embrace them with open arms and say, they're really doing a good job, you know. So it's a double-edged sword, if you like.
Yeah, Giselle. No, can't hear you.
She's on mute. She's on mute.
Giselle.
Shafiq. Poor girl. She can't unmute herself.
Yeah, she can.
Try. She can't do it.
No.
Oh, there she.
Yeah. Part of the problem I do feel is that this UK government has not got an inbuilt program for immigrants to learn English. And I found over and over again, because it's cropped up a lot in my work in fostering and adoption, we desperately needed people, and not only to be employed in the organization as staff, but also especially there's such a shortage of foster carers. I have people coming to me from all sorts of countries, Poland, Romania, and they've been here for 10 years and 15 years and they can't speak English. And yet in all the other European countries, I've spoken to so many other people, that people from Africa and Somalia and Eritrea and wherever you can think of, they've left their own countries, they've gone to live in Italy or Holland or Belgium or one of these countries, and all these European countries, the moment they arrive, they have to register in college, and they compulsory, just as mandatory, they have to learn the language of the country.
And in
so
Israel.
I try to recruit people as foster carers, and they're telling me that they're from, for example, Eritrea, they can speak Dutch fluently, and they've been longer living in the UK, and they've been living in the UK for 10 years, but they still can't speak English properly.
All this highlights one big thing failing in a way, and that is that the government needs to have policies which are acceptable to the local populations and also meet the requirements of the economy. Now, if there is going to be mismanagement, and we have seen that, then all sorts of fears are then put into the public by all sorts of people have their own agendas. So I think the government is very instrumental in determining what is a good policy and for the well-being of the country. Now, I've got only a few minutes now. So if we move on to another subject, if anybody else has any comment or a question. Nina, you're new to us.
Well, I agree with Rose. That's all I agreed with Rose, certainly about immigration. I totally agreed with Rose.
Thank you.
Right.
One of the things that interested me from what you were saying was that 3D printing and the ability to start manufacture in a completely different way with all sorts of materials, I mean, opens up such a new world, you know, when you don't have to tool up a factory in order to produce. And I think this for the UK is a golden opportunity for us to invest in manufacture and stop just being a service industry, because we've got to try to become self-sufficient and actually produce cheaply what it is that we need, as opposed to importing it from places like China.
Well, the main thing that we need to acquire, apart from satisfying our own needs, is to develop skills which we can then produce products which we can export. Now, those skills are in the high tech. This is why we are talking about high tech today, because UK is well positioned to avail the opportunities. It's got very good institutions to create, invest in people, but then it's got the thing wrong by applying huge costs to the students. It's apprenticeship system is not well developed. If you look at Germany and all that, it's a very, Europe, they have a very advanced sort of schemes there. And I go by my own experience here. When I had somebody from Slovakia, I think, who came and fixed my toilet and bathrooms, he did such an excellent job all by himself, and his father did the electrical work, the ceramic, the plumbing, the whole lot, you know, and did an A1 job. So and he came out of a very good type of training in his own country. So we have to be able to develop our own skills here, and to be able to then sort of say to ourselves, okay, if we want to advance in the world, which is a very sort of, if you like, moving very rapidly, people in India and China, they're advancing in various high-tech sort of fields very rapidly, because they've got dozens of people coming out, millions of people coming out of universities, and they are going into all sorts of areas which we are not even thinking of.
So what you're really saying is that we should actually start investing in technical colleges again, which actually teach practical trades, okay, which carry you forward. And that should be, I guess, that, you know, student grants, the same thing, similar to university degrees, so that people can practically go out with skills, you know, in order to encourage manufacturing in this country. I think it's essential for us to stop being reliant on other countries, start growing our own produce. When I read, I missed the two last things, but I listened in. And this thing about growing your own produce on the side of a building, they do that in Holland. They have these long, high glass buildings, okay, which have constant nutrients running through them from top to bottom, and they grow their own vegetables. And, you know, in nutritious organic liquid, as it were, for local consumption, you know, for themselves. They're becoming self-sufficient and can grow so many things instead of importing them. And we must do the same things. This is essential for us. And it could be, you know, supermarkets, you could invest in that type of technology, etc., and grow their own. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's I think it should be the way forward, to start thinking about manufacture. And it really excited me when I realized that you can actually tool up a company with 3D technology in future. So there's not this massive investment in plant and machinery.
I agree. I think I agree with all you're saying there, Ross.
Excited me.
What I'll do is, since we've got to finish off soon, I'll very quickly go through each one of you to say if you have anything, and then we'll end the week. Okay, George, starting with you.
One of the things that I think has been missed out here is that the people who run this earth are not interested in making your life any better. They're interested in making profits. Now, the only reason that these people, I don't call them immigrants, I call them economic wage slaves, are here is because they are prepared to work for less wages than what people originally worked for, and therefore they are very welcome because they don't get paid holiday pay, they don't get, they won't join trade unions and things like that. Now, is also the other thing you have to bear in mind that the last industrial revolution that we had was, and look what happened afterwards. Look, when we had the creation of these towns like Manchester, Liverpool, these nightmare places where people were treated really difficultly. And so I think that without people earning decent wages, nothing will change for the vast majority of people, but a small group of people will get very rich. And one of the ways that they do is they divide and rule, as you well know. So they will bring in people and they will say, it's like, I'll give it an instance, 24 bus, number 24 bus. I had a friend of mine on a number 24 bus for 15 years. Very active in the trade union movement, everything. 24 bus got a new company, took it over. They immediately got rid of all of their drivers, and now they recruited directly from Eastern Europe, and they're paying them 2/3 of what the English drivers used to get. And this is something which is going on all the time. And this is what drives people mad, is because instead of people getting a proper wage for a job, is other people are prepared to work for nothing because in their country that would be a lot of money.
Yeah, that is the other question, George, as well, that we need to think about, which is that these drivers also will become obsolete because there will be self-driving buses and trucks. So we need to prepare for that world.
That's a very dangerous slope you're going down because, like, if you say that things are obsolete and things like that, then people will become obsolete. And
They are. This is the danger.
We are.
We are.
You can get a machine to cut your lawn.
This is the big danger. Okay, we'll move on from you, George, to who else? Oh, Mushtaq, anything from you? You've got nothing. Okay. Pam, you always.
Well, I
I
wanted to say I totally agree with Ross. She's right. But also, I heard that 3D printing, you can print body parts.
Yes, yes.
Which is amazing,
Amazing.
for surgery. So I think it's a very exciting future.
Me
really.
too. Amazing.
Mm.
Yeah,
Amazing.
now, think of it just what we talked about, which is what we in fact need to keep our minds on, because the pre-pandemic issues are still with us.
Mm.
But the additional problems that we have is this big virus that has come in and closure of all this, and the economy having gone into a crisis. And this may be an opportunity to do some fresh thinking. And that fresh thinking means that we will be able to sort of bring in policies. Like, for instance, if you're going to rescue companies, giving Virgin or whoever it is $6 million or $1 billion, we should put conditions. So if you're going to rescue anything or give grants, we have to put conditions on those people to make it a greener type of policy for the future. And we should just find out,
Mm-hmm.
I also think there's going to be a chance for people to learn more rapidly by attending these type of lessons, as it were, for people to learn some sort of technology from home, that they don't have to go to a college every day. They can work from home. When they're learning the practicalities or demonstrating them, they can go into college for that one day a week. And it becomes easier for people to educate themselves, provided that it becomes a requirement, as it were. That you can't you have to go on to further education after school in order to actually learn whatever trade it may be. And it doesn't always have to be practical at the beginning. But as long as we're investing and giving student loans or whatever to people in order for them to encourage them to learn a trade.
Let me just conclude by saying, go back to the first slide that I showed. we've got to make thinking which is going to better the world. And bettering the world means others as well besides ourselves. So that should be there in our mind. Okay? Right, I'll close up now if you don't mind, because if we have run into nearly...
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting.
Thank you.
It's very mind stretching.
I'll prepare the video and send you the link, all right?
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
See you all.
Bye.
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 Good week. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.